You've always prided yourself on being a good observer. Quiet, unassuming, you watch the world from the comfort of your own home. The view from your window reveals a peaceful street, the kind where nothing ever happens. But lately, you've noticed something different. It's the man who lives next door, the one no one seems to know much about. He's always been a little strange, but never enough to raise any alarm. At first it was small things, odd timings, strange comings and goings at night. You told yourself it was nothing, that everyone has their quirks. But then there were the sounds, muffled, almost like whispers, sometimes late into the night, when the rest of the neighborhood was asleep. And the smell, a faint, sickly odor, like rotting meat, drifting from his house, carried on the breeze into your open windows. Your mind began to spin, connecting dots that may not have been there. Was it paranoia? Or was it instinct? You couldn't be sure, but the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. You started watching him more closely, noticing things you hadn't before. The way he never seemed to interact with anyone. The way he would disappear for days at a time, only to return with bags, heavy, bulging bags that he carried into the house under the cover of darkness. You try to dismiss it. After all, you have no proof. But in the pit of your stomach, you feel it. Something's not right. You've convinced yourself that the man next door is hiding something. Something dark, something dangerous. And now, you have to find out what it is. It's late, well past midnight, and the world outside your window is cloaked in silence. From the safety of your living room, you keep your eyes trained on the house next door. The streetlights barely reach its crumbling facade, leaving most of it shrouded in shadows. But there's movement inside. You can just make out a faint glow flickering behind the curtains. He's awake again. You grab your binoculars, the ones you swore you'd never use for anything like this. But curiosity has turned into something darker, an obsession you can't shake. You focus in, peering through the narrow gap in the curtains. He's pacing, back and forth, his silhouette jittery in the dim light. Something about the way he moves feels off. It's frantic, as if he's nervous, hiding something. Then you see it. A second shadow, barely noticeable, flickers just behind him. At first, you think it's a trick of the light, but no, it's there. Another figure, something lurking in the dark behind him. The realization sends a chill crawling up your spine. Who, or what, is in that house with him? The light flickers out, plunging the house into darkness. Your heart races as you pull back from the window, the binoculars slipping from your trembling hands. Questions flood your mind. Who else is in that house? You've never seen anyone go in or out but him. And the noises, the ones you've been hearing at night, suddenly make sense. You try to push it out of your head, tell yourself that you're imagining things, but you know you're past the point of turning back. Something is wrong. Desperately wrong. And whatever it is, it's hidden inside those walls, just beyond the reach of your sight. You begin digging, researching, scanning through local records, old news articles, anything that might offer a glimpse into the man's past. You find whispers, small, unsettling mentions of the house, of people who used to live there but vanished without a trace. The further you dig, the worse it gets. The dates line up with the times you've seen him disappear for days, and the rumors hint at disappearances, at something sinister lurking beneath the surface of the neighborhood's quiet calm. Your heart pounds as you realize the truth is closer than you thought. You can't stop now. Whatever he's hiding, you have to know. It's a cold night when you make the decision. The fear gnaws at you, but it's too late to stop. You've spent too many sleepless nights staring at that house, watching, waiting for a sign. The flickering light in the attic has been on for hours now, longer than usual. Something is different tonight. The street is eerily quiet as you step out of your house, heart hammering in your chest. Every shadow feels like it's watching you, the night air thick with tension. You walk slowly, silently, as if the very darkness is a warning. But you don't turn back. Not now. The front door is locked as you expected, but you've already scoped out another way in, the basement window, low and partially cracked. Your hands shake as you pry it open and slide inside, landing softly on the dusty floor. The smell hits you immediately, stronger here inside. That same rancid odor of decay, only now it clings to your skin, making your stomach turn. You stand still, listening. The house is silent, almost too silent. Every instinct screams at you to leave, but you press forward. The air feels heavy, as though the house itself is alive, watching, waiting for you to make a wrong move. The halls are narrow, the wallpaper peeling like old skin, and the shadows seem to reach out, pulling you deeper into the belly of the beast. You creep through the house, step by agonizing step, every creak of the floorboards sending a jolt of fear through your body. The light from your flashlight flickers, casting long, distorted shadows that dance across the walls. As you make your way upstairs, the air becomes colder, more oppressive. The flickering light you saw from your window is coming from behind a door at the end of the hall, the locked door. It's an old, heavy thing, the kind that feels more like a barrier than a door. You press your ear against it, and there, just beneath the hum of silence, you hear something. A faint rhythmic sound, like breathing. Or worse, like something struggling to breathe. Your fingers tremble as you reach for the handle. Locked. Of course, it's locked. But there's a keyhole, and through it you can see just a sliver of what lies beyond. You lower yourself to your knees, hesitating for a moment before you peer through. At first, you see nothing, just darkness. Then, slowly, your eyes adjust, and you see it. A shape, a figure hunched over in the gloom, its movements slow and deliberate. Your heart stops as you realize what you're looking at. The man is not alone. There's someone, no, something, on the other side of the door with him. Something that doesn't belong here. Something that shouldn't exist. And now you know. You were right all along. Whatever he's hiding, it's worse than you imagined. The sound of footsteps echoes from downstairs. He's coming. Panic grips you, but there's no time to waste. The footsteps grow louder, more deliberate, as if he knows someone is in his home. You scramble to your feet and glance around frantically, your mind racing for a solution. There's no way back, only forward. You need to get behind that door. Your trembling hands reach into your pocket, pulling out a small, thin piece of metal you brought with you. A makeshift lockpick, something you never thought you'd actually use. Your fingers fumble, the keyhole stubborn and unforgiving, but with a desperate twist, you feel the mechanism click. The door creaks open, and you slip inside, closing it quietly behind you just as the footsteps reach the top of the stairs. The room beyond is pitch black, save for the faint glow of a single bulb swinging from the ceiling. Your flashlight beam cuts through the darkness, revealing a nightmare that steals your breath away. The room is a grotesque shrine to violence and madness. The walls are stained with old blood, long-dried splatters marking where countless victims met their end. The stench of decay is overpowering now, so thick it coats your throat. In the far corner you see it, an old rusted chair bolted to the floor, chains hanging from its arms and legs. But that's not the worst of it. The real horror lies in the center of the room. A pit, yawning wide like an open mouth, descends into darkness. It's deeper than you can fathom, the bottom lost in shadow. Around the edge of the pit, grotesque objects hang on the walls, tools, knives, saws, each one caked with dried blood. Your heart races as you realize this isn't just a place of death, it's a place of torture, a place where people are brought to suffer. And then you see the remains. Scattered across the floor, barely recognizable, are the twisted remnants of the man's victims. Bones gnawed clean, limbs discarded like trash. The air hums with the weight of unspeakable acts that have taken place here. You take a step back, your stomach churning, and almost stumble over something. When you turn, you freeze. In the corner, barely visible in the flickering light, is a person. No, a body. Pale, thin, and unmoving, but not yet dead. Eyes wide, mouth gagged, wrists bound, they're barely clinging to life. You rush to their side, your hands shaking as you try to pull at the ropes binding them. But then you hear it, a soft click, the sound of a door opening behind you. The man has entered the room. For a moment, time seems to stop. You don't dare move. His footsteps are slow, deliberate as he approaches. You feel the weight of his presence before you see him. The flashlight trembles in your hand as you turn it toward the source of the sound. He stands at the doorway, bathed in shadow, his face calm, but his eyes are cold, dead. He knows what you've seen. He knows you've uncovered his secret. And now, you're trapped here with him, inside this house of horrors. You want to run, to scream, to fight. But the realization sinks in like a dagger. You've stepped into a place you were never meant to leave. The door behind you slams shut with a heavy thud. The door slams shut, and the sound echoes like a final deafening heartbeat. You spin around, your pulse hammering in your ears. He's standing there, blocking your only way out, a slow, twisted smile creeping across his face. The flashlight beam flickers as you hold it in trembling hands, casting long, distorted shadows across the blood-stained room. He takes a step closer, slow and deliberate, like a predator savoring the fear in its prey. His eyes are dark, empty, as though whatever humanity once lived in him has long since rotted away. You can't breathe. Your mind screams at you to run, but where? You glance around, searching desperately for an escape route, but there's nowhere to go. Then, without warning, he lunges. Adrenaline surges through you as you leap to the side, barely dodging his grasp. The flashlight drops, clattering to the floor, and the room plunges into darkness. You scramble blindly, your hands brushing against the cold, slick floor, trying to find something, anything you can use to defend yourself. Your fingers close around a metal object, a heavy wrench. You grip it tightly, your breath coming in short, ragged bursts as you listen. The room is silent again, but you know he's there, stalking you, moving quietly through the shadows. You swing wildly, the wrench cutting through the air, but it hits nothing. The silence is unbearable, the waiting, the tension. He's toying with you. Suddenly you hear a rustle, just behind you. Instinct takes over and you swing again, harder this time. There's a sickening thud, followed by a low grunt of pain. For a moment, everything stops. The room feels still, too still. You can barely make out his shape in the dark, clutching his head, staggering back. But he's not down. Not yet. He roars with fury and charges at you, and this time, you're not quick enough. His hands clamp down on your throat, squeezing, lifting you off the ground. You struggle, gasping for air, kicking desperately as his grip tightens. His face is inches from yours now, twisted into something monstrous, something not quite human. With the last bit of strength you can muster, you swing the wrench again, this time connecting with his jaw. He stumbles, his grip loosening just enough for you to slip free. You hit the ground hard, coughing, gasping for breath, but there's no time to stop. You scramble to your feet, blood pounding in your ears, and make a dash for the door. It won't budge. He's locked you in. Desperation claws at you as you search for another way out. The window. There's a small, barred window in the corner. If you can break through it, maybe you can squeeze through. But as you turn toward it, you see him rising to his feet again, blood dripping from his mouth, a crazed look in his eyes. He's coming for you, slower this time, but determined, unstoppable. You race to the window, grabbing a nearby chair and slamming it against the glass. The first hit barely cracks it. You swing again, harder, and the glass shatters, raining shards onto the floor. But the bars, they won't give. Behind you, his footsteps grow louder, closer. You're running out of time. And then you remember the pit. It's a horrible, desperate thought, but it's all you have left. You run to the edge, staring into the black abyss, your heart racing. There's no telling what's down there, but it's your only chance. You glance back at him. He's nearly on you now, his eyes wild with fury, and without thinking, you throw yourself into the darkness. The fall is longer than you expected. For a brief moment, you're weightless, plummeting into the unknown. And then, with a bone-jarring impact, you hit the bottom. Pain explodes through your body, but you're alive. Barely. Above you, the man's face appears at the edge of the pit, staring down with a look of pure rage. But he won't follow. Not down here. Whatever horrors this pit holds, even he is afraid of them. You crawl, dragging yourself through the filth and darkness, every inch agonizing, your body screaming in pain. Somewhere in the distance, you hear something stirring, a soft, wet sound, like something crawling, slithering closer. You don't have time to think about what it is. You have to keep moving. There has to be another way out. There has to be. And as you inch forward, the realization hits you. The real nightmare isn't him. It's what he's been feeding down here. And now you're part of it. The darkness in the pit feels endless. Your body aches from the fall, every breath ragged and shallow. The sounds around you, wet, slithering things, draw closer, but you don't dare look back. Crawling through the filth, your mind races, searching for a way out. The walls are cold, damp, and slick, closing in on you like the jaws of some immense, unseen creature. Just when you think there's no escape, your hand brushes against something, a faint draft of cool air. Your heart skips a beat. An exit, maybe? You push forward with renewed desperation, the sound of whatever lurks in the shadows fading behind you. The space begins to open up, and you see it. A small crack in the stone wall, just wide enough to squeeze through. You don't think. You push your battered body through the opening, the rough stone scraping your skin until finally, you burst out into the open night air. The cold wind hits you like a slap, but you don't stop. You run. You don't know where you're going, but you know you need to put as much distance between yourself and that house as possible. When you finally collapse, miles from the house, your body gives out, and everything goes dark. When you wake, the morning sun is creeping over the horizon. Your clothes are torn, your body covered in bruises and cuts, but you're alive. Somehow, you made it out. You stumble toward the nearest road, flagging down a passing car. The driver, horrified by the sight of you, rushes you to safety. The authorities come. You tell them everything: the man, the house, the pit. They listen, but when they arrive at the house, it's as if it was all a nightmare. The basement is empty. The pit is gone. There's no evidence of the horrors you witnessed, no sign of the twisted room or the monstrous things lurking beneath the house. The man disappeared. No trace of him anywhere. The neighbors don't even seem to remember much about him, as if he had never truly existed. But you remember the sights, the sounds, the smell of death. It's all burned into your memory. Every time you close your eyes, you see his face, feel his hands tightening around your throat. The nightmares don't stop. And even worse is the knowledge that he's still out there, somewhere, waiting, watching. You can feel it, deep down. The terror hasn't ended, it's only moved on. The next neighborhood, the next quiet street. He's out there, in the shadows, hunting again. It was a dark and silent night when I sat by the campfire to tell a story that has haunted my family for generations. My father, a man of few words and many secrets, once shared with me an experience he lived through 20 years ago during a mission he could never forget. At the time, he was a fearless young soldier, full of vigor, but what he encountered that night in the mountains forever changed his view of the world. As he told me the story, his eyes revealed a deep fear, something I had never seen in him before. It wasn't the ordinary fear of someone who had faced danger, but the terror of one who had witnessed the inexplicable. He and his comrades had been sent to a remote area where the wind howled fiercely, and the silence was almost deafening. Their task was simple: investigate an abandoned cornfield. But nothing about that mission was simple. As the night fell, something sinister began to manifest in the air. Something none of them were prepared to face. What he saw, what he heard, what all of them felt in that darkness. My father told me it was not of this world. But what really happened that night? I will tell you, but prepare yourself, because after hearing this story, you too will never be the same. When my father and the other soldiers arrived at the site, the sun was already setting, casting long shadows over the cornfield. The field stretched as far as the eye could see, with perfect rows of tall plants swaying gently in the wind. But there was something wrong, something none of them could quite define. It was as if the very air was charged with a heavy, suffocating energy, and the silence, oh, the silence was the worst of all. The birds weren't singing, the insects weren't buzzing. Only the restless rustling of the corn leaves, like indecipherable whispers, accompanied every move the soldiers made. My father felt a chill down his spine, a foreboding he couldn't shake, but he pressed on. The mission was clear: investigate the area and report any anomalies. They set up camp near the edge of the field, deciding it would be safer to wait until dawn to explore more carefully. The beams from their flashlights cut through the darkness, but did nothing to dispel the feeling that they were being watched. Every sound they made seemed to echo back, amplified by the emptiness surrounding them. As the night finally enveloped them, the darkness brought with it a growing unease. My father took turns with the others to keep watch over the camp, but something inside him told him this night would be different from the others. He looked up at the starry sky, trying to find comfort in the vastness above, but all he felt was the weight of the unknown pressing down on them like an invisible shadow. As he sat there, his back to the cornfield, he didn't know that it would be the last time he'd see the world the same way. The true mission would begin in the next few hours, and what he was about to encounter would haunt him for the rest of his life. The night dragged on slowly, each minute crawling by with increasing tension. My father was on his watch when he heard the first sound. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, like something moving among the rows of corn. He stood up slowly, his eyes fixed on the darkness of the field, trying to discern what was happening. The rustling of the leaves grew more intense, as if something was stalking through the plants, getting closer. He turned on his flashlight, sweeping the beam of light across the field, but all he saw were the shadows of the leaves dancing in the wind. Yet, the sound persisted, now closer, more urgent. My father called the others, and together they tried to identify the source of those noises. But whatever was out there was too fast and too quiet to be seen, like a shadow slipping through the darkness. Then the phenomena began. The compasses, which had been steady until then, started spinning wildly in their hands, as if north no longer existed. The radios, which kept the group in constant communication, began emitting nothing but static, a sharp noise that seemed to penetrate their very bones. But the worst of all was the sensation, that invisible presence that now made itself felt more strongly. It was as if the air around them was alive, pulsing with a malevolent energy, something that shouldn't be there, something not of this world. My father felt fear grip him, an emotion he rarely experienced. They were surrounded by a force they couldn't see, something that toyed with their minds, and even though they were armed to the teeth, they felt powerless in the face of the unknown. The noises continued, sometimes to the left, sometimes to the right, always moving, always out of reach. Then, in a moment of absolute silence, they all heard it. A deep, guttural sound, like the roar of a creature that didn't belong to the earth. It was brief, but enough to freeze the blood in their veins. They were not alone in that cornfield. Something was watching them. Something was hunting them. And in that instant, my father knew they had entered a territory where the rules of the world they knew no longer applied. When dawn finally began to brighten the sky, bringing a bit of relief to the group, the soldiers heard footsteps approaching along the path. It was the other platoon that should have joined them the previous night. But instead of seeing relieved faces, my father saw in their eyes an expression he knew well: terror. The leader of the other group, a man usually calm and confident, was pale with trembling hands. He began to recount what had happened to them during the night. They had gotten lost in the mountain trails, something strange as they knew the area well. A fog had risen from nowhere, swallowing everything around them and confusing their senses. Then, in the middle of that dense fog, they saw two figures ahead. They were women, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, as if they had stepped out of another time. They seemed to float more than walk, their feet barely touching the ground. Without a word, they pointed to a path, a shortcut that should lead them back to the camp. The group's leader hesitated, suspicious, but the women seemed so serene, so certain of what they were doing, that he decided to follow their directions. The path they showed was not on any of the maps they carried, but inexplicably, it led them right back to their comrades. When they turned to thank the women, they were no longer there. They had vanished into the fog as mysteriously as they had appeared. What disturbed my father and the others wasn't just the story itself, but the way it was told. These men, hardened by war, were trembling, their voices faltering as they described the women. It was as if the simple act of remembering had the power to bring back the horror they had felt. As the sun rose, everyone knew something wasn't right. The cornfield, which should have been just a curiosity, now felt like a trap, a place where the laws of reality were distorted. And those women, who or what were they? Protectors? Guardians of an ancient secret? Or something even more sinister? The group was divided between the desire to leave immediately and the duty to complete the mission. But one thing was certain: no one wanted to be there when night fell again. With the arrival of morning, the sunlight brought a false sense of security to the group. However, the tension was palpable, and the strange occurrences of the previous night still loomed over everyone like a dark cloud. They gathered to discuss the next step, but the decision was not easy. The story of the two mysterious women, along with the inexplicable noises and the terrifying presence in the field, had broken everyone's spirits. The group was divided. Some wanted to abandon the mission, return to the base, and leave that cursed place behind. Others, driven by a sense of duty, insisted they should at least explore a little more before making any decision. But deep down, they all knew they were on the edge, that the cornfield held secrets they were not prepared to uncover. Finally, the decision was made. They would follow the path indicated by the mysterious women, hoping it would lead them to safety. Without further hesitation, they began to break camp, preparing to leave. As they moved away from the field, the sense of relief was almost immediate. The strange phenomena began to diminish, and the oppressive atmosphere that surrounded them seemed to dissipate with every step. During the return journey, however, silence reigned. No one dared speak about what had happened, as if putting it into words would somehow give more power to the unknown. My father, who had always been a man of few words, never forgot what he saw and heard that night, but he knew that reporting everything at the base would be useless. Who would believe them? Tales of unknown creatures and ghostly women would be easily dismissed as the hallucinations of tired soldiers. When they finally arrived at the base, the faces of the officers were a mix of disbelief and concern. The official versions of the events were simplified, omitting the most disturbing details. The mission was considered a technical success, but those who participated knew they had faced something far beyond the ordinary. My father carried that experience with him for the rest of his life. He was never the same after that night, and the other soldiers who were there weren't either. Whenever he spoke of what happened, there was a shadow in his eyes, a darkness that even time couldn't erase. And as for the women and the creature that roamed the field, they were never seen again, at least not by those who dared return to that region. But the stories continued, passed from mouth to mouth, warning those who might consider venturing into those lands. It wasn't just a legend. It wasn't just a soldier's tale. It was a warning, a reminder that there are forces in this world beyond our comprehension, and that some places should simply be left alone. As my father finished telling this story, the silence that followed was almost as heavy as the darkness he had described. He looked at me, his tired eyes revealing more than words could express. I had never seen that look before, a mixture of fear, respect, and acceptance of the unknown. He didn't need to say anything more. I knew that this experience had shaped the man he had become, and that, in some way, he was passing this burden on to me. Since that night, my father avoided talking about the mission. What happened in that cornfield remained buried deep in his memory, like a wound that never healed. He left me with a piece of advice I will never forget. There are places in this world that were not made for us, places where the rules are different, where the impossible becomes real. If you ever find yourself in a place like that, listen to the whispers of the wind and follow your instincts, because sometimes the only safe path is to walk away and never look back. This story is not just about what he experienced, but a warning to all of us. The world is vast and mysterious, and there are things out there that escape our understanding. My father and his comrades were witnesses to something that defies logic, and they learned the hard way that the unknown should not be underestimated. So if you ever find yourself in a place where the silence is deafening, where the shadows seem to move on their own, remember what you've heard here. Not all stories have explanations, and not all paths should be followed. Some things simply do not belong to our world. The night was calm, one of those where the silence feels almost comforting. Inside the apartment, everything exuded a sense of familiarity. The gentle warmth from the heater cut through the cold outside, and the walls, dimly lit by the soft lights, seemed to embrace the lone tenant in a comforting routine. The distant noise of cars was muffled, and the sounds of the city were nothing more than a subtle background echo, almost insignificant. There, in the heart of that apartment, they felt safe. The space was small but comfortable. The arrangement of the furniture, the sound of the clock on the wall, the soft glow from the kitchen lamp, all contributed to a feeling of peace. It was a sanctuary against the chaos outside. But it was precisely this tranquility that concealed something. In the air, something invisible moved at the edges of perception, like a shadow you don't notice until it's too late. The hot water cascaded over the tenants' shoulders, running down their body, bringing a sense of relief after a long day. The bathroom was enveloped in steam, the walls fogged up, and the mirror completely covered by a thin layer of condensation. It was one of those simple, almost meditative moments where thoughts drift aimlessly, and the warmth of the water soothes every tired muscle. But then, amid this comfort, something felt off. A sound, a whisper, so faint that, for a moment, they thought they had imagined it. The noise was absorbed by the constant flow of water, disappearing almost as quickly as it had appeared. They stood still for a few seconds, listening, ears picking up only the sound of the shower and the soft echo of water hitting the floor. Nothing. It had to be the plumbing, they thought, a natural reaction to the water pressure. Maybe the sound of old pipes. With a slight shrug, they relaxed again, convinced there was no reason for concern. But then, again, a whisper, this time clearer, distinct, almost human. It was faint, coming from somewhere very close. They slowly turned their head, looking around the bathroom as if expecting to see something. The shower curtain was slightly open, revealing only a portion of the fogged-up mirror and part of the bathroom floor. Everything was quiet, except for the sound of the water. Their hearts sped up slightly, a twinge of unease creeping down their spine. They turned off the shower, and the sound of the water stopped abruptly, leaving the room in a muffled silence, the dripping of water creating small echoes on the tiles. They stood there, motionless, waiting to hear it again. The apartment, so cozy and safe just minutes ago, now felt different, as if something invisible was moving in the shadows. Seconds passed, but there was no further whisper, only the heavy, almost oppressive silence. They laughed nervously, trying to convince themselves it had all been their imagination. They were tired, that was it. Exhaustion plays tricks on the mind, creates sounds, shapes, makes your eyes see things that aren't there. They grabbed the towel and began to dry off quickly, eager to leave the bathroom and shake off that strange sense of unease. But as they moved, drying their face, they heard it again. This time, the whisper was closer, clearer, and it seemed to form words, though they couldn't understand what was being said. A chill ran down their spine, and for the first time they felt a presence, as if they were no longer alone. Something was watching. They hurried out of the bathroom, the towel wrapped around their waist, hair still dripping wet. The sense of safety and comfort that had surrounded them at the start of the night had completely vanished. As they walked down the hallway, the whispers they had heard seemed to echo in their mind, even though the environment was now almost eerily silent. With each step, the apartment, once so familiar, felt larger, emptier, stranger. They tried to shake off the unease, convincing themselves it was just their imagination. They turned on the television in the living room, hoping the sound of voices would fill the space and break that oppressive silence. But no matter how hard they tried, something was wrong. The shadows on the walls seemed denser, as if they pulsed in the dim light coming from the corner lamp. The sound of the television, instead of bringing comfort, mixed disjointedly with the atmosphere, like it was distant, muffled, almost irrelevant. They ran a hand through their still wet hair and dropped onto the sofa, trying to ignore the persistent feeling of being watched. The apartment was small, a space they knew by heart. Every piece of furniture was in its place, every object where it always had been. But tonight, everything felt different. There was a presence, something in the air, something they couldn't see, but that made itself felt with every beat of their racing heart. Suddenly, the kitchen light flickered. Once, twice, until it went out completely, plunging the room into an even more unsettling dimness. They stood up slowly, their eyes fixed on the kitchen doorway, which now looked like a portal to something dark and unknown. They took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. It was just a fuse, they told themselves. Light bulbs sometimes burn out, nothing more. But in the back of their mind, the feeling of being watched grew, insistent. It was as if something was moving in the shadows, something they couldn't see directly, but that was there, lurking, waiting for a moment of distraction. They took a few steps toward the kitchen but stopped halfway, feeling that approaching the darkness would be like crossing a boundary that should never be crossed. And then the whispers started again. This time, they weren't confined to the bathroom. They seemed to come from everywhere, from the corners of the living room, from the dark hallway, from the shadows behind the sofa. They were faint, but impossible to ignore, like an incessant murmur scratching at the edges of their sanity. They closed their eyes for a moment, trying to block out the sound, but it was useless. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, as if the voices were trying to communicate, trying to break through some invisible veil separating them and the thing lurking in the shadows. They opened their eyes, their chest rising and falling rapidly. The air was heavy, difficult to breathe, and the apartment seemed to close in around them, becoming oppressive, claustrophobic. The living room lights were still flickering, threatening to go out at any moment, and they felt with crushing certainty that they were no longer alone. The feeling of being watched was now tangible, as though invisible eyes were in every corner, spying, judging, waiting for them to make a mistake. And then, in the reflection of the living room mirror, they saw a shape pass quickly behind them. Something moved in silence, disappearing before they could focus on it. They turned immediately, heart pounding, but there was nothing, only emptiness and shadows, which seemed denser with each passing second. The apartment, which had always been their refuge, now felt like a prison. Something was there, and the game had only just begun. Their breathing became quick and uneven, each breath heavy, weighed down by the invisible presence that now filled the apartment. They stood frozen in the middle of the living room, glancing in every direction, waiting for something to move, some sign of what was watching them. But what they felt was even more terrifying than any physical figure. It was the constant whispering, soft and persistent, now impossible to escape, as if it had seeped into the very air around them. The whispers. They wouldn't stop. They moved along the walls, bounced off the furniture, and seemed to ooze from the shadows that had gathered in the darkest corners of the room. The voices were indistinct, impossible to understand, but they carried a sinister urgency, an expectation that chilled their blood. They felt as if they were on the verge of understanding something, on the brink of being consumed by knowledge their mind refused to accept. They glanced at the clock. Only a few minutes had passed, but it felt like an eternity had unfolded around them. Each passing second made the sensation of being watched grow, until it was unbearable. They could no longer ignore it. Each time they turned their head, the fleeting glimpse of a shape just outside their vision sent a shiver through their entire body. It was always too fast to focus on, always on the edges of their perception, taunting them, as if something was playing with them, waiting for the perfect moment. They tried to turn on every light in the house, but some of them wouldn't respond, while others flickered erratically, casting the room into brief, strobe-like flashes of darkness. In every moment the light failed. They felt the shadows move, stretch, as if they were alive, slowly closing in on them. It was as if the very structure of the apartment was changing, the rooms feeling longer, more twisted, and the walls seemed to be closing in on them, trapping them in a labyrinth that no longer made sense. They rushed to the bedroom, slamming the door shut behind them, their heart pounding. The bedroom felt safer, but that was just an illusion. They knew that now. The shadows outside didn't need an open door. The whispers, now louder, seemed to seep through the cracks, slipping under the door, through the walls, wrapping around their thoughts. It was as if their mind was being invaded, overtaken by something they couldn't control. And then, a strange realization took hold. This wasn't their apartment anymore. They weren't in their home. Something had taken over, a presence that had infiltrated their space and transformed it into something else entirely. Every piece of the environment, every familiar object, now seemed charged with an unknown purpose. It was as if they were being lured into a trap, and the voices were calling, hypnotic, trying to convince them to surrender to that invisible force. They glanced at the wardrobe mirror, and for the first time they saw it clearly. It wasn't a reflection, but something behind them, a long, undefined shadow, a figure that had no precise contours, but it was there, watching them. They spun around immediately, heart in their throat, but once again, nothing, just emptiness. Desperation began to take hold. There was nowhere to run, and every corner of the apartment seemed to close in around them, the shadows gaining a life of their own, stretching like invisible fingers ready to pull them in. They tried to scream, but the sound died in their throat. Fear crushed their voice, their body paralyzed by the overwhelming presence of something they couldn't see but felt like a suffocating force. And then they realized the whispers weren't coming from outside, they were coming from within. The voices were inside their head, whispering secrets their mind refused to hear, unearthing ancient fears, digging deep into their sanity. That presence, whatever it was, had been waiting. It knew them, understood them in a way no one else ever had. It was playing with them, manipulating them, like a spider weaving its web around its prey. They knew, deep down, that there was no turning back. Whatever was in that apartment wasn't just some entity. It was something ancient, a force that existed beyond human comprehension, beyond time. And now, that force was with them, and it wasn't going to leave. The apartment wasn't a refuge anymore. It was the maw of something much greater, something that was about to swallow them whole. The bedroom seemed to shrink around them, the shadows moving with a slow, sinister intent, as if they were alive, watching every step, the whispering now constant, a presence in their mind, a distorted melody they couldn't block out. They knew they were at the edge of something, some point of no return. The apartment, once a safe haven, felt like an alien place, ruled by forces beyond anything they could understand. They stood from the bed, body trembling, breath shallow. They couldn't stay here, trapped. Something was closing in, getting closer, and they could feel that with every passing second. They were on the verge of being consumed. The lights flickered frenetically, the mirror in the corner of the room seemed to pulse, and the air felt thick, heavy, like they were moving through something invisible. But the whispers, they weren't just whispers anymore. Now they formed words, phrases they still couldn't fully grasp, but they were starting to take shape in their mind. A presence was trying to communicate, or maybe it wasn't just one presence. The voices sounded like many, intertwined, different tones and frequencies, a cacophony of voices surrounding them like a net. They stumbled into the hallway, eyes fixed on the darkness pooling in the living room. They were ready to face whatever it was. Not because they wanted to, but because they knew they had no other choice. It was as if something was pulling them, drawing them toward the heart of the apartment, where the sensation of presence was strongest. With every step, the whispers grew louder, clearer, and more urgent. They could hear fragmented words, disjointed pieces of an ancient language, something primal and unforgiving. As they reached the living room, they saw it. In the middle of the room, the shadows swirled, spinning slowly like a storm of black smoke. In the center of that darkness, a shape began to take form, something vaguely human but grotesquely wrong. It was a figure with no clear boundaries, its edges blurred as if it existed partially within and outside this reality. Its eyes were two deep, empty slits that stared at them as if probing every corner of their soul. They froze, unable to move. The voices in their head were now unbearable, screaming, pleading, demanding them to get closer. The presence in the room seemed to grow, expanding beyond the apartment walls, filling the entire space with an energy that crushed them. The air was thick, hard to breathe, and each heartbeat echoed in their ears like a sinister drum. They tried to step back, but their feet were stuck, as if the very ground was holding them in place. The shadows began to stretch toward them, like invisible hands, slow and inevitable. The figure in the center of the room didn't move, but its power, its influence, was undeniable. It was as if the darkness itself had a consciousness, something that existed beyond time and space, beyond human understanding. And that thing had chosen them. In a last act of desperation, they tried to scream, but no sound came out. Their hands shook, eyes wide, fixed on the thing before them as the shadows finally wrapped around them. The warmth of the room was replaced by an intense cold, as if the very air around them was being sucked into that vortex of darkness. And then, silence. The whispers stopped abruptly, leaving the apartment in a crushing, suffocating quiet. The shadowy figure, now fully formed, stood just a few feet away, its eyes staring into them with a terrible stillness, a stillness that spoke of eternities and ancient horrors far beyond their comprehension. They finally understood. This wasn't just any entity. They were standing before something much greater, something that existed beyond the limits of this world. That thing watching them was an ancient force, something that had always been there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for someone, waiting for them. The apartment had never been just an ordinary place. It was a portal, a passageway to something far older and far more terrifying. And in a single moment, they realized the true horror. The whispers weren't warnings. They weren't telling them to escape. They were invitations. They had been called, chosen by that invisible presence. There was no going back now. The shadows consumed them entirely, and in the moment they did, they knew they had crossed a boundary into something no human was ever meant to know. Everything went dark. The apartment, the world around them, everything dissolved into eternal darkness, and they were taken by the force that had watched them all night. The game was over, and they had lost. The silence in the apartment was absolute, almost tangible. The darkness that had once pulsed in the shadows was now still, cold, as if the very atmosphere had been suspended in time. Nothing moved. The living room, once the stage of an invisible battle, was now submerged in a sinister stillness. The lights that had flickered so violently were now extinguished, and the apartment felt empty, abandoned. The air, once heavy and oppressive, now lay still, as if all life had been drained from the space. The figure the tenant had seen, that indefinable presence, had disappeared along with them. There were no signs of struggle, no sound or hint of movement. Only the distant echo of the whispers now silenced, as if they had never existed. The apartment's walls remained unchanged, the clock still ticking in its steady rhythm, and the windows reflected the darkness of the night outside. Everything seemed normal, but it wasn't. The apartment, though it appeared the same, would never be the same again. Something had changed, something had been awakened, and it now inhabited that space permanently. The invisible presence that had pursued them hadn't left for them. It was still there, hidden in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. And in that suffocating silence, one thing was certain: the tenant would never truly be alone again. Even though no one else would know what had happened there, the darkness knew. The shadows knew. They were always lurking, always watching. And in the heart of that apartment, the invisible presence remained, patient, silent, waiting for the next. The desert stretches out endlessly beneath a sky painted in dark hues, with only the faintest stars offering light. A lone trucker grips the steering wheel, his hands steady after years on the road. The hum of the engine is his only companion, as the massive rig cuts through the silence of the night. It's a stretch of highway few dare to travel, isolated, forgotten, and infamous for strange disappearances. He's driven it before, knows every turn, every dip in the cracked asphalt, but tonight feels different. There's a weight in the air, something thick and oppressive that clings to the cab of his truck. The radio hisses with static, the station barely holding, as if even the signals are reluctant to linger here. The wind outside howls in the distance, a low, mournful sound that seems to echo for miles. But he's not worried. He's seen worse, driven through storms that would shake most men. He's faced exhaustion and roads that seem to go on forever. But tonight, as the darkness presses in, there's an unease creeping up his spine. The kind of feeling that whispers something is watching, something is waiting. The headlights cut a narrow path through the blackness, but beyond them the world feels like a void. The kind of void where things vanish without a trace. And as the miles slip by, that unease grows, gnawing at him. Because on this road, there are places where the night isn't just dark, it's alive. The trucker glances in his rearview mirror, more out of habit than concern, but something catches his eye. At first it's just a glint, faint headlights far off in the distance. It's nothing unusual, just another vehicle out on the road, though it seems odd given the desolation of the highway. He shrugs it off and keeps driving, focusing on the long stretch ahead. Minutes pass, and the lights grow brighter, closer. He eases his foot off the gas, thinking maybe the driver wants to pass, but something nags at him. The vehicle's movements don't feel right. It stays too perfectly aligned with his truck, matching his speed in a way that makes the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The trucker shifts in his seat, flicking his blinker to switch lanes, expecting the car to pass. But it doesn't. It stays right behind him, too close for comfort now. The lights are blinding in his mirrors, almost unnatural in their brightness. His hands tighten on the wheel as a cold knot of anxiety starts to form in his stomach. He picks up speed, but the vehicle follows suit, never falling behind, never overtaking him. It's like a shadow, glued to his bumper, silent and menacing. His heart begins to pound, and he takes another glance in the mirror, hoping to make out the driver, but all he can see are those blinding headlights. The darkness surrounding him feels heavier now, like it's closing in, suffocating. Something's wrong. He's driven these roads for years, and no one behaves like this out here. The trucker's instincts scream at him. This isn't a normal car. It's something else, something dangerous, and it's not here by chance. The trucker's pulse quickens as he grips the wheel tighter, trying to shake off the rising panic. He presses down harder on the gas, the engine roaring as the rig picks up speed. But the car behind him stays locked in place, its headlights still flooding his mirrors, too close, far too close. It's as if the vehicle is tethered to him, a shadow that refuses to let go. He tries to outmaneuver it, veering slightly left, then right, hoping the other driver will take the hint and pass. But the car mirrors his every move, swaying with a deadly precision that makes his chest tighten. It's not just following him, it's toying with him, a predator stalking its prey. Sweat beads on his forehead despite the cool night air. He swerves again, more sharply this time, trying to throw the car off. The truck groans under the sudden shift, but the phantom vehicle stays with him, moving as if it's reading his every thought, anticipating his every turn. It inches closer, the space between them narrowing, suffocating. A tremor of fear snakes through him. This isn't a case of road rage. This thing, whatever it is, isn't just another driver. No horn blares, no angry flashes of high beams. It's silent, eerily so, like a ghost chasing him through the night. He can feel it now, deep in his bones. This car doesn't belong here, on this road. It doesn't belong in the world of the living. His mind races, searching for answers. What is it? Why is it following him? As the headlights flicker slightly, casting strange shadows on the road ahead, he remembers the rumors. The stories other truckers had whispered over late-night coffee, about the road, about the disappearances. Men who vanished without a trace. Rig after rig found abandoned, the drivers gone, as if they were swallowed by the night itself. His heart pounds harder. Could this be what they meant? Could this be the thing they spoke of in hushed voices, warning newcomers to avoid the highway after dark? The trucker's thoughts spiral as the ghostly car looms behind him, a relentless predator in the rearview mirror. His mind floods with fragments of those warnings, stories that once seemed like superstitions told by weary drivers to pass the time. But now, with that cursed car bearing down on him, they feel all too real. He presses harder on the accelerator, pushing the truck to its limit. The engine growls, protesting the strain, but the mysterious vehicle never wavers. It doesn't seem to follow the same rules of physics. Every turn, every swerve he makes, the car mimics, almost gliding along the cracked asphalt without effort. There's no sound from its engine, no screech of tires, only the heavy, oppressive silence that wraps around him like a noose. The radio crackles with static again, the same eerie sound that greeted him earlier, only now it's louder, more insistent. Fragments of voices slip through the interference, garbled and distant. They sound like whispers, as though someone or something is trying to reach him from the other side. A cold shiver runs down his spine as he realizes the whispers aren't coming from his radio, but from somewhere deep within the night. He has to get away. Frantically, he scans the road ahead. He knows this highway well, knows the gas stations and rest stops are few and far between, but none of that matters now. Escape is all that's on his mind. Up ahead, there's an exit, an old unmarked road he's never taken before, barely visible in the dim glow of his headlights. Without thinking, he jerks the wheel to the right, sending the truck careening toward the narrow path. The truck lurches violently as it hits the rough terrain, the wheels struggling for traction on the dirt and gravel. The headlights behind him waver for the first time, flickering as the car struggles to follow. For a brief moment, hope flares in his chest. Maybe this is his chance. But just as quickly as the headlights dimmed, they surge back to life, brighter and more aggressive than ever. The car follows him onto the dirt road, moving with a terrifying smoothness, as if the rough ground doesn't affect it at all. It's closer now, close enough that he can see the outline of the vehicle in his side mirror, a rusted, decrepit thing, barely holding together. But there's no driver. The seat is empty. His blood runs cold. He realizes now, this isn't just a haunted road. This is something far worse. The trucker's breath catches in his throat as he stares at the empty seat in the rearview mirror. No driver, no life. Just a rusted, decaying shell of a vehicle, impossibly keeping pace with his rig on the rough dirt road. Panic grips him tighter than ever, his heart hammering against his chest. This isn't a game of cat and mouse anymore. This is a chase with something not of this world. The terrain grows rougher, the road narrowing into a barely visible trail through the desert. The truck bounces violently over the uneven ground, the steering wheel vibrating in his hands. He's losing control, both of the vehicle and of his nerves. But stopping isn't an option. He knows that much. Stopping would mean facing whatever that thing is, and deep down, he knows there's no surviving that encounter. The headlights behind him flicker again, but this time, they dim just enough for him to catch a glimpse of something more in the rearview mirror. The shadows inside the rusted car shift and twist, almost as if something is moving in the back seat. His pulse spikes. He forces himself to look again, despite the dread curling in his gut. And there they are, faces. Faint, ghostly faces pressed against the cracked, fogged windows. Their expressions frozen in horror, eyes wide and mouths agape in silent screams. They look like they're trapped, begging for release, their features distorted by the grime and dust that coat the car's glass. The trucker's stomach churns with the sickening realization. These are the lost souls, the ones who disappeared from this cursed road. The whispers return, louder now, more distinct. He can almost make out their words, but they're fractured, like voices carried on the wind. They plead, they warn, but their message is unclear, lost in the chaos of static and the roar of his engine. All he knows is that the car behind him is more than just a haunted relic. It's a prison for those it claims, and now it's after him. With a surge of desperation, he floors the gas, the truck lurching forward with all the power it can muster. The rig groans in protest, but he doesn't care. He has to outrun this thing, has to break free from the nightmare that's chasing him. The dirt road snakes through the desert, winding into unfamiliar territory, but there's no time to think, no time to plan. His only goal is to get as far away from the ghostly car as possible, but the rusted vehicle won't let him go. It stays on his tail, relentless, its headlights flickering like dying embers in the rear view. The faces of the lost souls press closer against the windows, their terror palpable, their silent screams growing more frantic with every passing second. It's as if they know the end is near, for both them and him. The trucker's mind races, searching for a way out, some last-ditch effort to survive. He knows the road is running out, that soon he'll have no choice but to face whatever fate awaits him. The trucker's heart pounds as the road ahead twists and narrows, leading him deeper into the desert's darkness. Every instinct tells him there's no escape, but he refuses to accept it. The faces in the cursed car grow more desperate, their eyes hollow and haunting, as if they know he's close to joining them. The whispers around him grow louder, echoing in the cab of his truck like the cries of the damned. He's running out of time. The exit ahead is barely visible, a sharp turn leading toward a cliff that drops into the abyss of the desert. He hesitates for a split second. There's no way out. The road ends here, but the thought of stopping, of letting that ghostly vehicle catch him, is worse than death itself. He makes his decision. With a sudden, reckless twist of the wheel, the truck veers off the dirt road and toward the cliff. The rig skids violently, the back end fishtailing as dust and gravel kick up around him. The ghostly car follows, its headlights burning brighter, like the eyes of a predator sensing its prey's desperation. It's close now, so close he can feel the chill of its unnatural presence seeping through the cab. The cliff's edge rushes toward him, and for a moment, the trucker's mind goes blank. The rig teeters on the brink, wheels spinning as the earth crumbles beneath him. The ghost car is right there, a twisted shadow, its headlights bearing down on him with impossible intensity. But then, with a desperate surge of adrenaline, the trucker slams the gear shift into reverse. The rig lurches backward, tires screeching, just as the ghostly vehicle surges forward to finish the chase. For a breathless second, the The two vehicles are locked in a deadly dance, one fighting to survive, the other to claim another victim. Then, with a sickening screech of metal, the ghost car's momentum carries it over the edge. The headlights flicker wildly, the twisted shadows of the lost souls vanishing in a haze of dust as the vehicle plummets into the void. For a moment, there's silence, a chilling stillness, as the trucker's rig comes to a shuddering halt, inches from the cliff's edge. The roar of the ghost car fades into the darkness below, swallowed by the endless desert. The trucker sits frozen, hands trembling on the wheel, his heart racing in his chest. He stares into the abyss where the car disappeared, disbelief washing over him. Did he actually survive? Did he escape whatever curse haunted that road? But as the dust settles, a creeping realization slithers into his mind. The road doesn't let anyone go that easily. He may have won the battle, but the night still feels alive around him. The trucker sits in the cab, his knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel, his breath ragged. The silence after the chaos is deafening. The ghostly car is gone, plunged into the abyss, but the air still feels heavy, like the desert itself is holding its breath. He dares to believe it's over, that he's escaped the nightmare, but deep down, the dread lingers. With trembling hands, he shifts the truck into drive and slowly pulls away from the cliff's edge, his heart still pounding in his chest. The road ahead stretches out into the darkness, endless and unforgiving. The trucker's eyes flick nervously to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those headlights flicker back to life, but there's only darkness behind him. Yet something about that darkness feels wrong, too quiet, too still. He drives on, the rig rumbling along the rough terrain as he tries to calm his racing thoughts. The faces he saw in the ghost car still haunt him, their desperate expressions burned into his mind. They were more than just echoes of the past. They were warnings, trapped souls that had been claimed by this cursed road. And for a moment, he wonders if he's really escaped, or if the road is simply waiting, biding its time before it comes for him again. The trucker wipes a hand across his brow, trying to shake off the paranoia creeping over him. He tells himself it's over, that whatever haunted this stretch of highway is gone. But as the miles tick by, the oppressive silence grows heavier. The desert stretches on endlessly, and no matter how far he drives, the feeling of being watched clings to him like a second skin. Then, just as he starts to relax, something catches his eye. In the rearview mirror, faint at first, but unmistakable, headlights. His blood runs cold. The lights are distant, barely a flicker on the horizon, but they're there, creeping closer with every second. His hands tighten on the wheel, a sickening realization washing over him. The car didn't fall. It didn't disappear into the abyss. It's still out there, hunting him. The trucker's pulse quickens again as he watches the lights grow brighter, closer. His heart pounds in his chest, the terror returning in full force. He presses down on the gas, the truck groaning as it picks up speed. But it doesn't matter. The headlights stay in his mirror, relentless, unyielding. He knows now, there's no escape. This road, this cursed stretch of desert, doesn't let anyone go. It claimed those before him, and now it's coming for him. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the roar of his engine and the howl of the wind, the whispers begin again. The trucker's heart races, panic swelling in his chest as the headlights creep closer, cutting through the darkness like silent predators. He's driving as fast as the truck can handle, the engine straining under the pressure, but the lights remain, haunting him from the rearview mirror. He feels trapped, caught in a nightmare where no matter how far or fast he goes, the road will always lead him back to this moment. The truck rattles over the uneven terrain, but the phantom car's movements remain smooth, unnatural. It's like it's gliding, unhindered by the laws of the physical world. He keeps his eyes on the road ahead, hands trembling on the wheel, but his mind is spiraling into fear. He knows now that the highway isn't just cursed, it's a hunter, and he's the prey. The whispers grow louder, the static on the radio crackling to life again, only this time it feels like they're coming from the very air around him, filling the cab of his truck. It's the voices of the lost, the souls trapped on this forsaken road. They call out to him, pleading, warning, their messages fractured and desperate. Turn back, never leave, you belong. He grips the steering wheel tighter, refusing to listen, refusing to accept that his fate is sealed. But deep down, he knows. This road has claimed him, just like it claimed the others. The lights behind him glow brighter, now just feet away from his truck's rear bumper. They're closing in. A wave of dread crashes over him as a thought pierces his mind. The road will never let him leave. No matter how fast or far he drives, it will keep him trapped here, endlessly circling back to that cursed vehicle. His only choices are to surrender or to fight a battle he cannot win. In a final act of defiance, he veers hard to the right, skidding off the dirt path and plunging the truck into the wilderness. The rig barrels through the desert, bouncing over rocks and scrub, the wheels struggling for traction. He hopes, prays that by leaving the road he can escape the curse. But the lights follow, steady and unshaken by the rough terrain. They are relentless. The trucker's breath comes in ragged gasps as the desert stretches out before him, endless and barren. He can see nothing but darkness and hear nothing but the whispers and the rumble of his truck. The ghost car's lights are blinding now, almost on top of him, their brightness filling the cab with an unearthly glow. And then, without warning, the truck jolts violently, the wheels catching on something unseen. The steering wheel is ripped from his hands as the truck swerves uncontrollably. He fights to regain control, but it's too late. The rig tips, metal groaning and screeching as the world turns upside down. The truck flips, once, twice. Time slows as he's thrown against the seat, the sound of crashing metal and shattering glass ringing in his ears. Dust fills the air as the cab comes to a grinding halt, resting on its side. The world spins around him, and for a moment, all is silent. He lies there, disoriented, his body aching from the crash. The desert stretches out around him, quiet and still. He forces himself to breathe, to move, to escape the wreckage. But as he fumbles with the seatbelt, trying to free himself, something flickers in the corner of his eye. Headlights. The ghostly vehicle looms just outside the truck, its lights shining directly into the wreckage, as if watching him. Waiting, the trucker freezes. He knows now, with bone-deep certainty, that it's over. This thing, this entity, has won. He's no longer just another driver on the road. He's the next in line. The whispers return, louder than ever, filling his mind with the screams of the souls already claimed. The voices are no longer pleading, they're welcoming. As the headlights grow brighter, the trucker's vision blurs, darkness creeping in from the edges of his consciousness. He tries to move, to escape, but his body feels heavy, too heavy to lift. His heart pounds one last time as the shadows close in, and he finally understands what happened to the others who disappeared on this highway. In the end, the road always claims its victims. The trucker is gone. The desert is silent once more. And the road, as always, waits for the next soul foolish enough to cross it.